What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work to Game, and for those of you that have not been following all the news surrounding Shadowlands, we started out this week by finding out that they were ready to move into alpha, and since then they have continued to release all kinds of information. They have released everything from class updates, going kind of spec by spec, showing you the philosophies and some of the changes that they're intending to make, knowing that this is alpha, it's all subject to change, so, you know, they could still kind of shift this, but at least the thought process is established, and they'll likely stick to that, and then they may just pull back on some of the unpruning that they've done, or on some of the way that they're making certain abilities baseline, or certain specs based on how they play. I think a lot of these changes, even as players who may have played these classes for a number of years, I've played and rated as a druid in every expansion since the Burning Crusade. The Burning Crusade I rated as a hunter. And even looking at these druid changes, yes, it sounds exciting that balance is going back to one of my favorite ways to play balance, but until I kind of see it, I don't really know if it really feels the same. And that's going to be partially driven by all the changes they make. We still don't have every single change that they're making. And then second of all, by how the content feels. The content that they put in the game today is very different than the content that they put in before. And so kind of, even if you take the same class and you just airlift it into current content, it won't feel the same. How is the gearing going to work? Gear has been a major point of contention in Battle for Azeroth. How is that going to work? Especially as it seems that they somewhat seem to distance themselves from an AP grind this time around. I assume we won't lose it entirely, but the last couple expansions, that's been a really major thing. They also told us about some of the covenants, and so getting a chance to start seeing a little bit how covenants will work, and a little bit of kind of the history behind things like Bastion and Kyrian and all of that. Getting a feel for the covenants is something that, once again, they can even show us the abilities, but till we see those abilities in context, it'll be hard to know if they feel like they bolt onto a rotation or they inherently change that spec at a core level. And then, I don't know, it's just tough. And then we know that there's going to be more to covenants than just a couple of abilities. There's supposed to be lots of content to a covenant. So if you pick a covenant and you feel like, oh my gosh, this ability really isn't useful for me in a certain type of content, maybe there's other aspects of that covenant that are useful to you in that type of content. And so we really don't have the whole story. So it's a little premature, but it's exciting to see. And then they started to tell us about the new starting experience. New starting experience is something that we've needed for a long time. MMOs that have been around a while have content that's from before the new player experiences of modern games. And so it's this very much grind to get to end game. World of Warcraft is especially bad about putting so much of their game behind end game. And so that leveling process just feels very isolated, very lonely. They're going back and they are changing this. It's supposed to be like 60 to 70% faster. New players are going to be forced through it from 1 to 10, and they're going to go through Battle for Azeroth, then they're going to be released into Shadowlands. Existing players, or anybody who already has a character, is going to have a chance to either go through the new and then pick an expansion, or skip the new and pick an expansion. At level 50, you'll go from 50 to 60 in Shadowlands. And so getting to start to see little bits of information about, you know, the way they're going to teach us new skills, the way they're going to kind of ideally teach us to play. The one thing that, you know, predominant MMOs for me are Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, and neither of those games, people are like, oh, well, people who use jump potions, skip potions, level boosts, whatever the term you want to use is, they don't learn to play the game. I don't know that questing forces you to learn to play the game anyway, especially for roles like healers or tanks or AoE rotations, because AoE, in most games, as you're leveling, you don't necessarily pull the way that a group pulls or the way that a raid pulls, because you might die, especially for flimsy classes that do a lot of AoE damage. Tanks don't really get to practice tank and things like that because they can only pull what they can kill. Healers really only heal themselves. That is not the same as raid and dungeon content where healing is their primary focus. So the game doesn't do a great job of teaching you how to play it until you get shoved into that group content. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how they build this adventure ideally in a way where, like, if 14 had a chance to go back and rebuild the starting zone today, I would hope that there would be kind of trust dungeons built in, that your initial class quests would be these kind of trust things where you're forced into the role that your job is there to provide. And it'll be interesting to see if WoW does well with something like that. They're both games are redoing their new player experience this summer. WoW's is a more substantial overhaul. So we'll just have to see kind of how that lands. And then moving on from there, they have, of course, told us that, you know, we know the beta is coming up. We know a little bit about the Signature Covenant class abilities. We know a little bit about our class updates and what the plan is there. We know a little bit about kind of how the covenants are starting to look and the new player experience. They're, of course, pushing us to pre-purchase, but we don't yet know release date. And we don't yet know how the news is going to center around BlizzCon. So as of today, the announcement was made that BlizzCon is something that they just don't know if it's possible. They're not ready to cancel it. They don't know whether or not it's something that's going to be at the same time, when that's going to work. Spinning up these venues takes a while. Booking these venues takes a while. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of time, and there's a lot of people in one spot. There's a lot of travel. Hotels will need to be decent. They need to know that you're going to have a good experience there. There needs to be restaurants open again and all of this. And yes, that's not necessarily their problem, but I think that when you're planning a conference and you're planning on bringing this many people to a city, cities opening up convention centers isn't as simple as, will the convention center hold them and is it safe for them to be there? It's, will the city be able to accommodate them? Will there be places for those people to stay, things for them to do, and provide a safe and reasonable experience to justify bringing in what is effectively a large wave of tourists? So, you know, just kind of, that's the update. It says, we don't want to kind of make anything permanent, but that the health of the community, employees, and everyone who helps the show is our top consideration. It might be a few months before we know for certain. This is kind of direct quotes. And when we have a meaningful update, we'll share it. So hopefully, guys, this kind of catches you up on the World of Warcraft news for the week. It's a huge week in gaming for those of us that play MMOs, with Final Fantasy XIV getting a big patch, WoW getting all of this news finally, and of course, for any of you interested in Final Fantasy VII Remake, that is just around the corner. My name is Chris with Work2Game. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know kind of which part of this is getting you excited. Links are to the news post below of what I can find. Most of this is showing in my battle.net browser under the news tab. So just open up battle.net, click on news, and just go article by article. It's all there to read exactly what part of it affects you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.